She thought she was knocking over a trash can. What she really hit was the one thing that was finally going to bring her down. The sound came at 6:14 every Tuesday morning, right between the hiss of my coffee maker and the first week light sliding across my kitchen floor. A hard plastic crack. Then the scrape. Then the hollow tumble of a bin rolling across concrete, followed by the soft, filthy patter of garbage spilling onto my driveway like it had been dumped there by the hand of God himself. That morning, I was already standing at the window when it happened. I saw the pearl-white Escalade cut the corner too tight, just like it always did. I saw the front tire kiss the curb. I saw the back end swing wide. And I saw Brenda Whitmore keep both hands on the wheel and stare straight ahead like she was doing nothing at all. The bin flipped once, slammed into the edge of my mailbox post, and burst open. Coffee grounds, cereal boxes, empty soup cans, a pizza crust from the night before. All of it spread across my driveway in the cold grey light. Brenda never touched the brakes. Not even for a second. The SUV glided down the street with that polished suburban silence expensive vehicles have, and by the time I stepped onto the porch, all I could smell was wet trash, diesel from the sanitation truck somewhere down the block, and the sharp sting of my own patience finally burning out. Behind me, I heard my daughter Zoe's voice from the hallway. Again, she asked, still half asleep. I didn't answer right away. I just stood there in my socks, coffee mug warming one hand, staring at banana peels and junk mail spread across the concrete like some kind of personal message. Because the truth was, this wasn't an accident. Not the first time. Not the 5th. Not the 20th. By then, Brenda had made it part of her routine, same as her morning walk, same as her fake smile at HOA meetings, same as the way she talked about community standards like she was reading from a Bible she wrote herself. My name is Marcus Holloway. I'm 45, I've been an electrician for more than 2 decades, and I bought that corner lot house in Pinewood Gardens 3 years ago because I needed a reset. After the divorce, I wasn't looking for luxury. I wanted something quiet. Something solid. A place where my kids could come over on weekends and feel like their dad still had both feet under him. The house wasn't much to look at, but it was mine. Red brick, narrow driveway, 2-car garage, chain link fence out back, and just enough room in the kitchen for the 3 of us to eat takeout without bumping elbows. I thought that would be enough. What I didn't factor in was Brenda. 52 years old, retired bank manager, HOA busybody turned self-appointed queen of our little cul-de-sac kingdom. She drove that Escalade like it was a parade float and wore pressed pastel workout sets like she might get called to host a cable news segment on Lawn Symmetry at any moment. The woman had a voice sweet enough to pass for polite until you listened closely and heard the steel under it. She had already cited me for grass height, mailbox paint, and leaving my work van in my own driveway. The trash can thing started small. 1 hit. Then 2. Then every Tuesday like clockwork. But that morning felt different. Maybe it was the way Zoe said again from behind me. Maybe it was the smell. Maybe it was the fact that I was suddenly tired in a place deeper than my bones. Whatever it was, I remember looking down at that smashed-up bin and realizing something simple. Brenda thought routine made her untouchable. She had no idea routine was exactly what was going to make her easy to catch. By the end of October, I could tell what kind of morning it was by the sound of Brenda's engine before I ever saw her. That Escalade had a low, padded growl to it, like money wrapped in leather and bad intentions. I would be in the kitchen packing Zoe a snack for school or rinsing out my travel mug, and the second that sound rolled past the front hedges, something in my shoulders would tighten. Then came the impact. Not loud enough to wake the neighborhood, just loud enough to tell me she had done it again. Plastic cracking. Wheels brushing curb. A short pause. Then silence, which somehow always felt worse. That was the thing about Brenda. She never made a scene when she was doing something cruel. She preferred the neat version. The clean version. The version where she could always smile later and call it a misunderstanding. I started replacing trash cans so often the cashier at Home Depot stopped asking if I wanted the receipt in the bag. I kept them all anyway, folded in a manila envelope in my kitchen drawer next to the takeout menus and spare batteries. $23 here. $29 there. One with reinforced wheels that lasted exactly 6 days. Another with a locking lid that flew open the first time she clipped it hard enough. Little pieces of plastic and money adding up week after week, all because one woman could not stand the sight of something that reminded her not everyone in Pinewood Gardens lived the way she thought they should. My son Tyler noticed before I said anything. He was 14, old enough to hear patterns adults pretend not to hear. One Tuesday he stood at the front window in his socks, watching me pick coffee filters and orange peels off the driveway before sunrise. He said, "She does that on purpose, does she not?" Just like that. Calm. Matter of fact. I remember the air feeling cold against my face as I bent down for a crushed soda can, and for a second I hated that he had to ask. Kids should not have to learn what harassment looks like from the front window of their father's house. But they do. They learn from tone, from repetition, from the way a grown woman can use a smile like a weapon and still get invited to neighborhood potlucks. I told him I was handling it. The words came out steady, but they felt thin in my mouth. Because the truth was, up to that point, handling it had meant cleaning up the mess and getting on with my day. I had tried polite. I had tried practical. I had moved the bin 6 inches closer to the curb, then 6 inches farther from the curb, measuring with an old tape measure from my tool belt while morning dew soaked through my jeans. I checked city pickup rules online at 11:30 one night while the house was finally quiet and the blue light from my phone turned the kitchen counter's ghost pale. Containers had to be within 3 feet of the curb on collection day. That was the rule. I was inside the rule every single time. It did not matter. Brenda was not fighting a trash can. She was fighting the idea that I got to live there without asking for her approval. My corner lot made me visible, and visibility was all she needed. She would drift through the neighborhood in that white SUV, chin lifted, windows up, acting like she was patrolling a private kingdom instead of driving through a subdivision outside Columbus where most people just wanted their packages delivered on time and their grass left alone. And every week, when that bin hit the pavement, she left behind more than garbage. She left a message. You do not belong here. Your routine can be interrupted. Your peace can be taxed. Your home can be turned into a stage if I decide to make you the show. The smell that morning stayed with me even after I showered for work. Sour coffee. Wet cardboard. A faint rotten sweetness from a split trash bag baking under the first real sun. I was halfway through rewiring a panel at a dentist's office when I found a smear of dried coffee grounds still on the cuff of my jeans. I stared at it longer than I should have. Not because it mattered. Because it did. It was proof that Brenda's mess kept following me long after the driveway was clean. And that was the day I stopped thinking of it as a neighborhood annoyance. It was not random. It was not petty. It was a system. And systems, in my experience, always had a pattern. Brenda Whitmore did not become Brenda Whitmore overnight. Women like her are built slowly, layer by layer, with polished smiles, committee votes, and just enough local influence to make ordinary people doubt their own instincts. By the time I understood that, she had already spent 3 years turning Pinewood Gardens into the kind of neighborhood where people lowered their voices before saying her name. She lived 4 houses down from me in a 2-story brick place with black shutters, fresh mulch in perfect crescent beds, and a porch so clean it looked like no one had ever actually sat on it. Even from the street, you could smell those heavily perfumed flowers she planted by the walkway, sweet in a way that felt forced, like everything else about her. Brenda had been a bank manager before retiring, and she carried that same energy into the HOA like someone who had confused paperwork with morality. She loved forms, notices, warnings, hearings. She loved stamps and signatures and phrases like "for the good of the community." The first time she came to my door, she was holding a clipboard and wearing one of those pale blue exercise sets that probably cost more than my monthly electric bill. I remember because I had just come home from a service call, still smelling like insulation and drywall dust, and she looked at me the way people look at a stain they are not sure how to remove. She smiled first. Brenda always smiled first. Then she informed me that my mailbox color was slightly outside approved tones. Not wrong. Slightly outside. That was her gift. She knew how to make every insult sound administrative. After that came the notes about my lawn, then the questions about my work van, then a complaint about the sound of my impact driver in the garage one Saturday afternoon, even though city ordinance allowed it. She was not enforcing rules. She was establishing gravity. She wanted every person on this street to orbit around her comfort. Most people just gave in. I understood why. She was exhausting in a very specific way. Not loud. Not reckless. Just relentless. The kind of person who could turn a 5-minute inconvenience into 6 months of forms and meetings until you finally decided peace was cheaper than principle. Her husband had passed away years earlier, and somewhere along the line the neighborhood had turned that fact into a shield around her. People called her dedicated, organized, protective. What they meant was that they were scared of becoming her next project. At HOA meetings she sat at the folding table in the clubhouse with a stainless steel tumbler, a stack of printed agendas, and that same calm little nod she used whenever someone complained. She would let you finish, thank you for your input, then remind everyone that standards protected property values. Every sentence landed with the dry little tap of a judge setting down a gavel. And there I was, Marcus Holloway. Divorced electrician on a corner lot, exactly the kind of man she thought she could manage with enough pressure. I did not play golf. I did not trim bushes into decorative geometry. My hands looked like I worked for a living, because I did. My truck had extension ladders on top half the week. My garage had tools in it. My kids laughed too loud sometimes when they were over, and I ate dinner in work boots more often than not. To Brenda, I was not a neighbor. I was a category. Blue collar. Recently divorced. No wife in the front yard arranging seasonal pumpkins. No polished image. Just a man trying to hold on to a decent house and a little peace. And the trash can became her favorite way to remind me that in her mind, I was still on probation. The more I thought about it, the clearer it got. She did not pick that fight because of traffic flow or curb space or some made-up concern about safety. She picked it because it let her touch my life without ever stepping out of her car. One quick swerve, one broken bin, one more little humiliation before breakfast. Clean enough to deny. Petty enough to survive. Repeated enough to wear a man down. That was Brenda's real talent. She did not need to destroy anything big. She just chipped at the edges until your own home started to feel like borrowed ground. The next move came on a Thursday afternoon, and it carried that special Brenda flavor, fake courtesy wrapped around a threat. I got home a little after 5, the sky already turning that pale Ohio gray that makes every roofline look tired, and found a certified envelope wedged between my screen door and the frame. Heavy paper. Official HOA letterhead. My name printed dead center like I was being invited to my own execution. Inside was a notice titled Traffic Obstruction and Community Safety Violation. According to Brenda, my trash receptacle placement had created a recurring hazard for drivers navigating the corner near my property. Recurring hazard. I stood there on my porch in work boots with copper dust still clinging to my jeans, reading the sentence twice while the smell of cold leaves and distant chimney smoke drifted across the street. It was almost elegant in a twisted way. She had been the one running over the bin, and now she was trying to build paperwork around the damage like I had caused it. The letter gave me 72 hours to correct the issue or face $50 a day in fines. It also warned that repeated non-compliance could lead to a board review and possible legal action. Legal action over a city-issued trash pickup rule. I could practically hear her voice in the wording, sweet and clipped and full of that little pause she used before saying something nasty. I took the letter inside and set it on the kitchen table. Zoe was doing homework there, pencil tucked behind one ear, and she looked up the second she saw my face. "What now?" she asked. I handed her the paper. She read maybe 3 lines before her mouth flattened into that exact expression she got from her mother when something crossed from annoying into insulting. Tyler came in from the living room, grabbed an apple, and read over her shoulder. "So she hits the thing, then fines you for it," he said. I nodded once. The 3 of us stood there under the yellow kitchen light with that letter lying open between us like some ridiculous piece of theatre. But even then, Brenda was still not done. Saturday morning, she hosted one of her little driveway coffee gatherings, 3 women in white sneakers and expensive sunglasses clustered around folding chairs like a mobile judging panel. I was dragging my Nuken toward the curb when her voice floated across the street, light enough to sound accidental. Some people just never quite adjust to community living. One of the women gave a tight laugh. Another one looked away. I kept walking, but the words hit the back of my neck like heat. Not because they were clever. Because they were meant to be overheard. Brenda liked her attacks public enough to embarrass you and private enough to deny later. That same afternoon, I checked my email and found a second notice, this one with attached photos. My bin, circled in red from 3 different angles, as if it were evidence from a major investigation instead of a plastic container sitting exactly where city code required. She had time-stamped them at 6:12 in the morning, 2 minutes before her usual pass by my house. That detail sat in my head all evening. 2 minutes. She was documenting the setup before she created the collision. By Monday, a neighbor named Mrs. Alvarez caught me near the mailbox kiosks and lowered her voice before speaking. She told me she had seen Brenda drift wide on purpose more than once. Said there was always room on the other side of the street. Said she did not want to get involved, but she was tired of pretending not to notice. Her words were quiet, almost apologetic, and that told me everything I needed to know about the atmosphere Brenda had built around herself. It was not respect. It was fear with a decorative wreath on it. I went home that evening, spread the notices across my kitchen counter, and lined them up next to my stack of replacement receipts. The paper smelled faintly of printer toner and bad faith. Every fine. Every photo. Every little manufactured complaint. The pattern was getting sharper now, like a wire pulled tight enough to hum. Brenda had moved past simple harassment. She was building a record. A story. One where she was the responsible guardian of the neighborhood and I was the careless problem at the corner. And once I saw that, really saw it, I understood something important. She was not just trying to irritate me. She was trying to make me look guilty before I ever opened my mouth. That should have been the moment I went straight to war. Instead, I did what working people always do first. I tried to be reasonable. Monday night, after dinner, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, the HOA notices stacked to my left, city code pulled up on the screen, and a legal pad filled with measurements and dates in my own handwriting. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional rattle from the old vent above the sink. I drafted an email to the board, not just Brenda, because I wanted witnesses. I attached the city sanitation rule showing containers had to be placed within 3 feet of the curb on collection day. I attached photos of my bin placement with a tape measure visible in frame. I attached scans of the receipts for the cans I had replaced. Then I kept my tone clean and calm. No sarcasm. No accusation. Just facts. I explained that the placement complied with city requirements, that I believed repeated vehicle contact had caused the damage, and that I was requesting the violation be withdrawn. I read that email 3 times before sending it, making sure every sentence sounded like a man trying to solve a problem, not start one. Brenda answered in 14 minutes. That alone told me she had been waiting. Her reply thanked me for my input, said the board would review the matter, and reminded me that community safety remained their highest priority. Community safety. It was almost impressive how she could hide contempt inside bureaucratic language. The next morning, I got my answer. Not from the board. From the driveway. I heard the Escalade roll up just after 6:13, smoother than ever, and then came the hit. Sharp. Deliberate. The kind of contact that said she had read my email and chosen her response with her steering wheel. When I stepped outside, cold air hit my face and the smell of split trash bags rose up off the concrete. The can had been pushed farther than usual, all the way into the edge of my lawn. One wheel snapped clean off. A yogurt cup sat upside down in the grass, catching the first light. Brenda's taillights disappeared at the end of the block without so much as a brake tap. By lunchtime, another email arrived. The board had completed its review. The violation would stand pending further homeowner cooperation. That phrase stayed with me. Further homeowner cooperation. Translation: submit. I still tried. Wednesday evening, I caught Brenda outside her house while she was trimming dead blooms off one of those perfectly arranged porch planters. The air smelled like damp mulch and expensive hand lotion. I walked over slow, empty-handed, making sure my voice stayed level. I told her I wanted this over. I told her the bin was placed legally, that the repeated damage was costing me money, and that if there was some concern about the turn radius, I was willing to discuss options. She looked at me for a long second, pruning shears gleaming in one hand, then gave me that small frozen smile of hers. Marcus, she said, some of us are trying very hard to preserve standards around here. You have to meet a community halfway before it can welcome you. Meet a community halfway. Like I was applying for entry to my own street. Then she turned back to her planter, conversation over. I stood there listening to the tiny metal snip of those shears and felt something settle inside me, quiet and hard. Not anger exactly. Clarity. I had offered facts. I had offered courtesy. I had offered her a clean exit. Brenda did not want a solution because the problem was the point. She wanted me off balance, apologizing for things I had not done, defending space I was already entitled to occupy. That night I spread everything out on the kitchen table again. Notices. Receipts. Photos. Emails. Dates. Times. I ran my thumb over the rough edge of the legal pad and realized I had been acting like this was a disagreement. It was not. It was a pattern with paperwork attached. And the second I stopped trying to win her over, I finally started thinking clearly enough to beat her. Once I stopped trying to convince Brenda, I started studying her. Not in some dramatic movie way. In the same way I diagnose a bad circuit or trace a short through a wall. You stop arguing with the symptom and start mapping the pattern. Tuesday mornings were the obvious part, but the deeper rhythm showed up when I laid everything side by side on the kitchen table. The first hit had happened at 6:14. The second at 6:13. Then 6:15. Never later than 6:16. Always before the sanitation truck turned onto our street around 6:28. Always on the same approach angle, south to north, hugging the curb too tight even though the road was wide enough for a school bus to make that turn clean. I printed screenshots from the photos she had attached to her own complaints and lined them up next to the pictures I had taken after each impact. The timestamps alone told a story. She photographed the bin before contact, then drove into it, then filed a complaint claiming the obstruction proved my negligence. The audacity of it almost made me laugh. Almost. Instead, I grabbed my tape measure and flashlight and walked the curb line after dinner while the November air bit through my jacket. The concrete still held a little warmth from the day, but the grass along the edge was cold and damp against my boots. I measured the width of the street from my curb to the opposite side. Plenty of room. I measured the distance from the curb to where I placed the can. 29 inches. Legal. I measured the arc from the corner to the point of impact. Consistent every time. When I crouched down with the flashlight, I found faint tire scuffs near the curb where her right front wheel kept tracking too close. Not accidental. Repeated. Intentional. Back inside, I pulled up the footage from my old doorbell camera. The quality was not great. Grainy pre-dawn light, limited angle, no clear shot of the contact point. But it gave me enough. Her speed. Her line. The fact that she never corrected the wheel. I watched 6 Tuesdays in a row with the sound low while Tyler did math homework at the counter and Zoe highlighted vocabulary words beside him. The footage played in little bursts of headlights and pale body panels sliding through darkness. Same movement. Same outcome. Same smug confidence in the rhythm of it. Tyler finally looked up and said, "She thinks nobody is paying attention." That was exactly it. Brenda believed in habits because habits had protected her. She counted on people being sleepy, busy, embarrassed, or too tired to make a case out of something as small as a trash can. But small things are where good evidence lives. Small things repeat. Small things leave marks. The next day, I stopped at the municipal building on my lunch break. The lobby smelled like old paper, floor polish, and the burnt coffee that lives in every government office in America. I asked for the sanitation placement ordinance in print, then asked a clerk at the counter whether homeowners were allowed to use heavier-duty receptacles as long as dimensions stayed compliant. She adjusted her glasses, checked the code book, and said yes. Material was not restricted. Placement was what mattered. I thanked her, took the printout, and sat in my truck for 10 full minutes staring at that sentence. Material was not restricted. That was when the first real shape of the plan slid into place. Not reckless. Not illegal. Just precise. I spent that evening in my garage surrounded by extension cords, tool cases, and the clean metallic smell of organized work. I looked at the stack of cracked plastic cans in the corner, each one split open by the same white SUV, and thought about what Brenda expected to happen next Tuesday. She expected another cheap bin. Another soft target. Another mess I would quietly clean up before work. She expected routine. What she did not expect was for me to treat her behavior the way I treated every stubborn problem on a job site. Measure first. Verify code. Upgrade the weak point. Then let the system reveal exactly where it breaks. The next Tuesday started the way all important mornings do, with silence that felt heavier than usual. I was up before dawn, standing in the garage with the overhead light humming above me and the smell of cold metal, sawdust, and old motor oil hanging in the air. The new receptacle sat in front of me where the cracked plastic ones had failed, plain enough at first glance, dark grey, city-compliant dimensions, lid balance clean, wheels squared, nothing flashy about it. That part mattered. Brenda noticed anything that looked like resistance. So I gave her nothing to notice. Just a bin that looked ordinary from the street and a man who looked like he had finally accepted his place in her little routine. But inside that routine, I had changed the only part she had been counting on. Weak plastic was gone. Guesswork was gone. That Tuesday was not about anger. It was about accuracy. The night before, I had mounted a second camera low under the porch rail where it caught the curb line, the wheel path, and the exact point of contact. I adjusted the angle 3 times until the frame held everything I needed, including the tape marker I had discreetly set near the placement line. Timestamp synced. Memory card cleared. Motion alerts armed. Then I rolled the receptacle to the curb and measured it one last time. 29 inches from the edge. Same as always. Legal. Visible. Defensible. I even took a photo with the morning edition of the newspaper folded on top so no one could pretend the placement had changed later. When I came back inside, Zoe was at the counter pouring cereal, still in pajamas, hair tied up, watching me through the kitchen window. "You look too calm," she said. I remember the spoon tapping against the side of her bowl. Small sound. Sharp in the quiet. I took a sip of coffee and told her calm was the point. Tyler came in a minute later and glanced outside, then back at me. He did not ask questions. He had my face when he got serious, and that morning he just nodded once like he understood that something had shifted. The air outside had that raw late fall bite to it, cold enough to make the front steps feel slick through my socks when I stepped onto the porch. The streetlights were still on, throwing pale yellow pools over empty driveways and trimmed hedges. Somewhere down the block a garage door rattled open. A dog barked once and stopped. Then I heard it. That low-padded engine note gliding toward the corner, smooth and familiar, the sound of confidence wrapped in chrome. I stayed on the porch, coffee in hand, not hiding, not waving, just standing there where the camera could see me and the whole street could have, too. The Escalade came into view exactly on schedule, white paint catching the streetlight, windshield dark, front end dipping just slightly as she took the turn. Same angle. Same line. Same belief that the world would move soft around her. For half a second, I wondered if she would notice something was different. Then I saw the front wheel hug the curb, saw the body drift in, saw that tiny correction she never made because she never thought she had to. And in that instant, before contact, before sound, before consequence, I knew the plan was going to work for the simplest reason in the world. Brenda had not changed at all. The sound was different from every other Tuesday. Not the hollow plastic crack I had gotten used to. This was deeper. Sharper. A hard metallic report that snapped through the morning air and bounced off the houses like a dropped wrench in an empty garage. The Escalade lurched, not dramatically, just enough to break the illusion of effortless control Brenda always wore like perfume. Then came the scrape of rubber against curb, the quick hiss of a brake finally pressed too late, and a silence so sudden it felt staged. Steam did not pour out. No movie theatrics. Just stillness. Clean, cold, humiliating stillness. Brenda's driver door opened a second later, and she stepped out into the pale yellow wash of the streetlight in a cream-colored tracksuit and white running shoes, one hand still gripping the edge of the door like she needed the vehicle to remind her who she was. She looked down at the front corner of that spotless SUV, then at the receptacle, then across the street at me on the porch. For the first time since I had moved into Pinewood Gardens, her face was doing something honest. She looked confused. Then offended. Then scared. Not because I had done something wrong. Because reality had stopped cooperating with her version of the story. "What did you put in that thing?" she called out, voice tight and high in the cold air. I took one sip of coffee before answering. "A trash can," I said. Placed 29 inches from the curb. Same as always. The words hung there between us. Simple. True. Impossible for her to twist in that moment. She glanced back at the receptacle again, as if it might confess on my behalf. It did not look special. That was the beauty of it. It still looked like an ordinary bin to anyone who had not spent days assuming plastic weakness was a permanent law of nature. Brenda took a step closer, then stopped when she saw me set my mug down and lift my phone. I was not filming her. I did not need to. The cameras already had everything. The curb line. The wheel path. The timestamp. The impact. Her approach angle. The fact that she had driven into the same legal placement she had been documenting for weeks. She knew it, too. You could see the realization spread across her face in little flickers, like a circuit overloading one switch at a time. By then porch lights had started coming on up and down the street. A curtain moved across from Mrs. Alvarez's living room. Someone opened a garage and paused halfway. Neighborhoods are funny like that. People can ignore a pattern for months, but the second confidence makes a sound when it breaks, everybody suddenly hears it. Brenda straightened up and tried to recover the old tone. "This is unacceptable," she said, brushing imaginary dust from her sleeve. "You intentionally created a hazard." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was so perfectly her. Even now, standing beside the first consequence she had not planned for, she was still reaching for paperwork in her voice. "No," I said. "I followed city code." Again. Then I added the part that made her blink. And this time I have a full-angle recording. That landed. She went very still. No smile. No nod. No little HOA president head tilt. Just silence and the faint ticking sound of her engine cooling in the dark. Within 10 minutes a patrol car rolled onto the street, blue and red lights washing over trimmed shrubs and mailbox posts. Brenda must have called them the second she got back inside her SUV, because Officer Langley stepped out already wearing the careful expression people use when they think they are walking into a neighbor dispute. Then I handed him the printed ordinance, the receipt history, the prior violation notices, and finally the video. He watched it once on my phone, then once again without saying a word. Same legal bin placement. Same clean turn available in the road. Same deliberate drift into contact. When he looked up, the whole street felt quieter than before. Brenda had spent months building a paper trail against me. She just did not realize I had finally built one back. Officer Langley did not say much on the curb that morning, but he did not have to. Men who have done the job long enough learn when a story collapses under its own weight. He looked at the video, looked at the printed city ordinance, looked at the stack of prior notices and replacement receipts in my hand, then turned to Brenda with a face that had gone flat and professional. The kind of face people wear when they are done entertaining nonsense. She tried anyway. Said the receptacle had been altered. Said I had engineered a trap. Said she was acting in defense of neighborhood safety. Every sentence sounded thinner than the one before it. Because the facts were simple now. The can was compliant. The street was wide. The placement was legal. The contact was repeated. Intent lives in repetition, and I had months of it. Langley asked her whether she wanted to revise her statement. That question landed harder than any accusation could have. I watched her blink into the porch light, lips pressed tight, one hand still resting on the side mirror of her SUV like she could hold her image together by force. She did not revise anything. Pride rarely lets people exit cleanly when they have spent too long thinking they own the doorway. By 8:30 that morning, after the sanitation truck had come and gone and the sun had finally burned the grey out of the sky, I was sitting at my kitchen table with a claims adjuster on speakerphone, emailing over the footage, the receipts, and the incident number from the police report. The house smelled like fresh coffee and cold air every time the heat kicked on. Zoe sat across from me pretending to study, but every few minutes I would catch her smiling down at the same page without turning it. Tyler kept drifting past the front window, checking the street like he expected the whole neighborhood to physically tilt now that Brenda had finally run into something that did not move. In a way, it had. The HOA board meeting that Thursday was fuller than I had ever seen it. Folding chairs scraped across the clubhouse floor. Cheap coffee steamed in paper cups. People who had spent years nodding along with Brenda's little speeches were suddenly studying their shoes, their phones, the ceiling tiles, anything but her face. I brought copies. Every notice. Every receipt. The ordinance. Still images from the camera angles. Timestamps from her own photos proving she documented the legal placement before impact. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I just laid the papers out one by one while the room smelled like burnt coffee, old carpet, and that sharp electric tension people carry when they realize the quiet guy in the back has been keeping records. Mrs. Alvarez spoke. Then another neighbor did. Then another. Once fear breaks, it does not mend quickly. Stories started coming out like tools from a deep drawer. Selective enforcement. Threat letters. Questionable fines. Little humiliation she had handed out over the years like candy at a parade. Brenda tried to maintain order, but there is no authority left in a voice once everyone hears the panic behind it. By the end of the meeting, the board voted to withdraw my violation, recommend reimbursement for the damaged receptacles, and open a formal review of prior enforcement actions issued under Brenda's name. She resigned 2 weeks later. Officially for personal reasons. That was the phrase in the community email, anyway. The same kind of polished language she had used on everyone else. But the street knew better. A month after that, I wheeled my trash can to the curb on a